Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
This episode of the Plant-Based Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Cobra. The Cobra range of garden machinery is constantly expanding and offers the UK's largest range of lawnmowers. With a comprehensive lineup of quality and innovative petrol, electric, battery and cordless products to tackle any gardening task, Cobra is the newest evolution in garden machinery. Visit cobragarden.co.uk for your chance to win a variety of great Cobra products.
So today, Ellen and I took a trip into the heart of the New Forest. We've enjoyed the heather, we've marvelled at the wild horses,
Yay!
And we've ended up at the UK's largest orchid nursery. This is a location called H Nurseries. They've been working on orchids for many, many years. We're here with account manager Dan Pass, and he's going to tell us all about their Love Orchids campaign, the orchids they grow, how to get the best of them, and most importantly, how to get the best out of orchids at home as well. So hopefully he's got lots of hints and tips. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We're in a pretty colourful location today.
It's lovely, and it smells amazing as well.
It's not a bad thing to come to work to every day. That's
No,
definitely
do you
not.
ever get bored of orchids?
No, because it's always changing. I think my wife may get bored of all the orchids I bring home. But, yeah.
To be like, Dan, seriously, can't you bring me back a fern?
So we're just going to kick off. Tell us about the story of H Nursery. First of all, where does that name even come from? And how long has it been here? Just tell us the story of how it developed.
Yeah, so H Nurseries started in 1961. It was essentially two gentlemen by the name of Joe Stevenson and Helmut Gimler. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they were both growers and they come together on this site. Before that, Joe Stevenson was producing sweet peas and carnations as cut flowers and sending them up to London, probably into Covent Garden and places like that. And then it's kind of, as the automation kind of become necessary, they teamed up and mm-hmm. H Nursery was built.
So Joseph doesn't start with H.
Yeah, it was. It was Joe Stevenson and Hugh Stevenson, so his son.
Okay, got it.
So yeah.
The Hugh and the helmet.
We have two meeting rooms named after them as well, so in their honour.
Wow. And how long ago was that?
So that was when those two come together was 1961.
Right.
And then Stevenson family's been growers for many years prior to that.
Wow.
So it's in there. I think we're on the fourth or fifth generation now.
Okay.
So it's in their blood.
That's amazing,
DNA.
isn't it?
Yeah.
They must always smell of orchids, is all I can say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, growing's in their blood for sure.
So, I mean, you've been here since the 60s. How many people work here now?
So we have about 250 people full-time that kind of work here, from packing plants to kind of the technical side. As you kind of see looking around, there's a lot of machinery which people don't expect with something that's so kind of delicate. But we've really got a lot of really talented people here that make it all happen. So at the peaks it gets a lot busier, of course. Right. So we have temporary people kind of come in to help kind of fulfill demand, and it can be up to 350, maybe 400 people.
It's like that's so many people. And we had a little walk around before we started to record the episode, and I love seeing the machinery. Everything's adapted to do certain things, and it's just super cool. But there's still people, there working the machinery. And,
well, you nearly got hit by an automatic moving moving trolley.
I did, yes, I was in the way of an automatic moving trolley. But yeah, with so many people and so much machinery, and also the delicacy I'm assuming that you have to, use when you're packaging orchids and, tying them into their shapes and all that kind of thing. What kind of training do your staff get?
Yeah, so it's kind of, some people have gone to kind of Sparschultz and kind of got an interest in growing. Others, it's just kind of, they've got kind of a hobby interest. So yeah, we provide all the training on site, so it's kind of experience really. The orchids, funnily enough, are not as delicate as they first seem, so we've done lots of different things with orchids.
Like throwing them around and just to see. Yeah,
well, they kind of, they travel through our kind of postal service with, some success.
Yeah.
And and the kind of couriers and things like that, we have a great success at transporting them, and then we've done other things with them, and we've seen hoops and cascades, and so all those kind of shapes and things that can be done with them, and they flower for months. So yeah, they're kind of not as delicate as you first think.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
good.
Well, I've seen your packaging out there, which is now 360, so the postman can juggle with it, throw it over the fence, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is, you've got to kind of safeguard yourself against what might happen to your plants in the post, and you seem to be doing it really well.
We have a saying: there's no such thing as bad postman, just bad packaging.
Absolutely. Just before we move on, I want to ask, with the original families obviously passed down through those generations, are they still very involved in the company?
Yeah,
how does that kind of work?
So Neil Stevenson is still the managing director. It's still a family business, and you'll kind of, as you look around the kind of business, you'll see posters and things like that still, it's all about family, a family business, kind of, looking after everyone, and even more so with the kind of whole COVID thing as well. It was a real kind of coming together sort of thing. And
And just for me, because I'm very nosy as well, how did you come into the company, and what training did you have? Did you go to horticulture college or so?
No, so my background's not horticulture at all. Probably why they've put me into the kind of sales side rather than the kind of anything to do with the growing. But over the last 10 years, I've kind of, learnt and kind of built up my kind of understanding, spent a lot of time with the kind of technical guys, and that sort of info just kind of seeps in over the years, and it's we're always learning. Everyone within the business is always learning. There's always new techniques, new growing methods. There's always new ways of treating pest and disease, and we've seen the kind of move away from chemicals into biological controls, and that's the kind of bit that kind of interested me from my last role into this role.
You can't be experienced. You can have all the education, which is fantastic, of course, but experience is where it's at. I think especially with plants, you can read the theory, and that is really important, but actually until you're actually out there doing it and learning about it, that's...
I think even now the jobs market's more competitive. They're looking for experience over qualifications. I've seen that reported in the news many times recently.
Interesting. Well, we've obviously had a little look around, and it's beautiful and colourful and all of that, and we've seen the different stages, but we'd love for you to just tell our listeners, how does it all start? Where does it start from? Where do the orchids grow? Where do they, like literally, like when I asked you, I had no idea. I just picked my orchids up off the shelf in the supermarket, So right from the very beginning, where do you get them from? What process do they go through? What materials do you use? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's quite a long growing chain, shall we say. So the orchids that you would buy in the supermarkets are about 2 years old. So it's a very, very, it takes a long time to grow one. Essentially what happens is we receive them from our kind of growers, or from our kind of young plant nurseries in a little plug form. So if you imagine the Phalaenopsis in its kind of smallest size, we plant them into kind of a bigger pot.
Is that micro-propped pieces of Phalaenopsis?
Yes. So it's essentially in petri dishes is how they kind of replicate.
So you need to wean them as well, then.
They kind of move. That's kind of all done pre-system. So the plants that the young plugs that we receive, they're kind of all viable. And so when you've got the kind of the process going on that we have, you need all that kind of vetting, and you need to be working with the best growers.
For sure.
Otherwise, you invest kind of two years of.
And how big are those original pieces, just so listeners can get a handle on that?
Smaller than your kind of fingernail sort of thing, and then that kind of grows on, and then it becomes like a small little Phalaenopsis.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it? So and then so they come in. So they've started off like in a petri dish. I love that. It's kind of a little bit scientific.
Yeah, it all takes place in the laboratory there at that thing. So very, very sterile conditions. And most of the plants come from Europe that feed most of the continent for sure.
And then they come here, and you have like processes obviously to grow them. And I know they go from hot to cold and that kind of thing. Like, how does all of that work?
Yeah, so it spends about 26 weeks in the hot zone, and that's kind of charging that plant up, getting the energy into its leaves and to its roots. We're really passionate about kind of creating the kind of strongest plant possible. There's lots of different ways, so you could keep them in the hot zone for a really short period of time, but you would end up with quite a weak root system, and that kind of affects things like reflowering, the number of flowers and things like that. So we're really after the kind of the Rolls Royce of orchids, really.
So don't rush it, basically.
Exactly, yeah. Good things come to those who wait.
We learned that in gardening.
And so we keep them in there for about 26 weeks. Certain varieties we keep in for longer, and then the cooling aspect of it, that's what kind of initiates the flowering. It brings the orchid, it thinks it's kind of time to reproduce, and that's when it sends up its spike or stem, and the flowers start to produce. And then it's probably about another 6 months after that until you kind of get the flowered plant.
Wow.
So
it's a long process.
Yeah, and a lot of TLC kind of goes in from the growing teams and things like that. So it's
And these orchids here, they're all Phalaenopsis, yeah.
Yes, it's the only one we grow. Of course, it's one of the largest kind of plant families, and I think it's something like 30,000. It's probably the most reliable one. It's probably the one that's most suited to most people's homes. So the kind of temperature of kind of that around that 20 degrees where an orchid will thrive on, just so happens that's kind of sort of temperature people keep their kind of central heated homes on kind of all year round. So they're absolutely kind of designed around our homes, and as long as we don't kind of cremate them or put them on top of a radiator or put them in a south-facing window, which they kind of get beamed with glorious sunshine, they should thrive.
Wow, we'll be looking out for your tips in part 2 for easy care at home. But first of all, so where do the plants end up then? So 2 years old, the plants are then put into cellophane, kind of into their decorative units, and then where are they ending up? M&S, big supermarkets. You are one of the main suppliers, aren't you?
Yeah, so we supply most of the retailers. Yeah, so like you said, Marks and Spencers and Waitrose are two of our kind of biggest customers, and they of course they've got a reputation for the best, and we have to make sure that that's what they get kind of day in day out.
So what makes a premium orchid? One that's bigger, one that's named, one that has 2 stems as opposed to 1?
Yeah,
what's
so
the criteria?
It all kind of comes back down to kind of varietal development. So and the hot zone is really, really important because that energy that you put into that, and then also the presentation as well. It's kind of how it's presented, how it's cared along the journey, because you can, as we keep saying to people within our business, you can grow an orchid for 2 years, and if you just chuck it in a box at the other end and knock flowers off and things like that, it doesn't matter how much time and energy you put into it. So it's really kind of packing with pride, as that we kind of focus on here, and you'll see that around the business as well. And I think that's being family business and kind of that packing with pride, gives us that kind of our edge. We also flower them up for a considerably longer time. So if you buy them from kind of those retailers, they have lots of buds to come, but also have that impact. So people that are giving us gifts kind of get that wow factor. Okay. Some of the other kind of continental plants tend to be a bit tighter.
Right. Cool. I mean, it all looks very organised when we're walking around, that is for sure. Yeah. But I did notice that you also had some other plants hanging about. I saw some house plants in there. Can't miss the odd house plant. Like, I literally home in on that. Yeah. But obviously, the majority here are orchids. So what kind of percentage do you
so about half in a total plants kind of capacity. About half the plants are orchids. The other half are pot chrysanthemums, and the other half are pot roses. Yeah. So so we've got kind of the three main crops, which if you kind of go into any supermarket, they're the kind of mainstay. Really, really popular for the British market. And
there's a few other foliage plants. We saw some Alocassia on a trolley.
Yeah.
Have you felt pressure to produce more houseplants now that they're popular?
Yeah, so we're always exploring different varieties and things like that. So we've got kind of a really good supply base that we work with for kind of offering our customers those sorts of plants. They're still very, very small part of the market when you kind of look at the grand scheme of things. But they're definitely something that's on the up, and we're right there at the front trying to bring customers what they want with regards to that.
How many orchids are in this building right now?
The last time I count, we had about 2 million.
Oh my gosh. Orchid heaven.
Wow. Yeah. I just wanted to ask, kind of in terms of sustainability and environmental, have you felt pressure to kind of react to that, and what steps are you taking here at Double H?
Yeah, so we were quite fortunate, kind of probably not a reaction, so to speak. We've always been at the kind of forefront. So we've recently had, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, had a biomass boiler installed. We've always done rainwater capture. We've always had a policy of zero, or worked towards zero to landfill, which we are now. We're always kind of investing in the next thing that's possible, sort of thing. So the environment's a kind of a key thing. Especially when people kind of taking plants into the home and things like that. That plants keeps taking kind of carbon dioxide out and things. So
you seem to kind of like be one step ahead or on the ball. That's how it would definitely appear and look like. During lockdown, obviously, garden centres were closed. And that must have had a huge knock-on effect, with nurseries and such, like for the whole industry at that point. And then that's when you started to do your orchids by post, wasn't it? So is that how it all came about, or was it something in the making?
Yeah, we've always had Love Orchids back when we first met at the Chelsea Flower Show.
Yeah, Chelsea. We'll come on to that in part 2, and you can tell us the story behind all that.
So we don't supply the garden centres generally. We've got a few local ones that kind of take plants. It's just kind of a different supply network. So we tend to kind of go into the big supermarkets. So we were purely luck that we didn't supply the garden centres, and that we supplied the supermarkets. But as food quite rightly become priority, and people kind of reacted. It was the day after, I remember it vividly. It was the day after Mother's Day. Lockdown got announced, and kind of everything kind of people started panic buying and those sorts of things, and so trucks become a real issue. Right. So all the retailers had to divert kind of resources and trucks into providing the nation with food. So demand for plants just kind of I'm not sure the demand kind of went away, but the priorities and getting them into the ship. Absolutely. And we just saw our weekly sales just kind of disappear overnight, really. So orchids we're quite lucky that they will hold for several weeks, and just kind of flower and flower and flower. And because we really invested in kind of that early days with that energy, the plants will last for quite some time. So you don't. It's not like bedding that it's fine today and 7 days later it's things.
Not.
So we're very, very thankful that what we grew was something that we could hold on to, and that gave us maybe a week or two to kind of switch on, kind of develop the Love Orchid side of stuff that we had for Chelsea, which was purely an educational piece, and switch that into kind of a .com business sort of thing.
It's become quite well known, really, hasn't it? And
I've
seen you have a bit of coverage here and there
for some plant, for some people that kind of grow plants. I think we're kind of doing.
Well, I think it was a great example of how a company during COVID diversified and made the best of the situation.
Yeah, indeed.
So it was a great story.
And so it's kind of gone from it was really, really strong, and because no one could get out to the shops and those sorts of things, and I think it was a really good. We in the early stages we gave plants to kind of people locally, the care workers and things like that. But as you can imagine, 30,000 orchids is not something that you can drop off to people's doorsteps and things like that. So we had to get kind of innovative and find a way to.
I'd rather panic buy orchids than toilet roll.
True. The leaves are quite strong, and you could use them.
You can reuse them.
So, kind of COVID aside, obviously a lot has changed this year very quickly. But kind of imagining COVID didn't exist, which is a lovely feeling. How have garden centres and their demands changed over the years? What do people buy a different type of orchid to what they did in the 90s, for example? And how has kind of things like IKEA, where they're like £2 a pop, how has that affected the market as well? Just give us a little brief overview, please.
Yeah, the market's definitely changed. Even since I've been in here in the industry. Back in the day, you just used to buy an orchid in a clear sleeve, and that was it. And then things kind of moved along slowly, where you'd get an orchid and someone would put it into a ceramic. Then the retailers and the popularity of them kind of really spiked, and different retailers wanted to put their own marks on, so it really started to become a developed product. So you'd get a branded sleeve from whatever retailer, and so it started this differentiation between each other that just wasn't there in the early days, and that's just kind of proliferated on. So everyone's trying to find their way in the market. Everyone's keen to kind of get their point of difference and their kind of unique selling points and things like that. And as a business that supplies them all, we've got to try and kind of facilitate that. And different companies have different priorities. And willing to invest in different ways in different areas. And you mentioned IKEA, theirs is they kind of call them stunt deals in the industry, where they buy up a nursery's kind of whole week's production and put it in. It's not sustainable long term sort of thing, and it kind of does devalue the product, but it's an exceptional price, and I think it's great that people can kind of tap into that.
It makes it more accessible, doesn't it, to more people?
And I think also people, if it's a couple of pounds or £5, I think they probably are in IKEA at times, is it kind of gets people interested, it whets their appetite, whereas if they're going to maybe go to a more premium retailer and buy something with a ceramic or give it as a gift. So I think it's a bit of a mixed kind of blessing and curse all in one sort of thing.
But it's like ever changing, isn't it? I guess the consumerism changes all of the time, and we've seen that very quickly and sustained during COVID. But you must have to continuously look at your lines, what you grow and sell, to keep in line with what the customer is continuously wanting, and that is continuously changing. And we walk past your trials area. Like, how do you decide what the next line is going to be, or what the next orchid is you're going to stock, or like how does that all come about?
So we're always talking to the kind of the retailers, and we're always talking to the kind of the general public as well. So whether it's shows or online surveys, or just kind of chatting to people when we're in store, just kind of understanding what people want, you know, the colour preferences. People change throughout the season and kind of change kind of almost with home decor. You know, people are trying to kind of, you know, if they love purple in their house, they kind of want a purple orchid and those sorts of things. So yeah, we've, you know, because orchids take so long to grow, it is, you know, from a colour perspective, or it's a slower thing to kind of change, but there's such a kind of myriad of colours that there's always something somewhere for someone. And yeah, it's just kind of bringing those new things in, so shapes and scent and the AGMs and those sorts of things that really kind of
the fragrance has to be the future now. Like a fragrant orchid, that's just double whammy beautiful.
The irony is they used to be scented, and it kind of got bred out for favour of kind of lots of flowers and lots of buds and, you know, those sorts of things, and now it's kind of being we're bringing it back.
They don't seem widespread yet. I mean, I've been chasing them for maybe even 10 years now because of the first trials, but are they still harder to produce, or what? Why do we not see fragrant orchids in all garden centres?
Yeah, it's a bit like scented roses to a certain degree. That you know, it's the scent over kind of longevity. So it's, you know, the growers didn't really want to bring out scented if it was going to kind of die, you know, in a couple of weeks, when your normal orchids are you know, lasting for 3 months. So it's all about kind of getting it right, and now you're starting to see some of the varieties coming through that you were seeing that you know, really got the scent and the life and the flower and bud count. So
but the ones we saw were the smaller ones, weren't they?
Yeah, it does.
Is there any fragrance being bred into the mid-size ones? Is that mid-size? What is it?
Yeah,
normal size orchid called.
Yeah, we call them in pot sizes, which is probably the least inspiring thing, which is 9 centimetre and 12 centimetre. But yeah, I'd call that a 12 centimetre pot is your standard orchid, really. The 9 centimetre tends to be more compact, and tends to have slightly more flowers in totality, but a lot smaller. So yeah, and we're trying to do more with regards to kind of flower types. So we're trying to create a midi, which is halfway between a 9 centimetre and a 12
It's like a midi skirt.
What's that?
A midi skirt.
One that covers your knees?
Well, it's not a maxi skirt or a mini skirt. It's a midi skirt. Midi, maxi. That's what you should call your orchids.
Cool. Okay then. Well, we've heard lots about orchids and how you guys grow orchids here, how they've developed over the years. But in part 2, as always, we want it to relate to the listener at home. So we're going to move into part 2, ask you lots of hints, tips, little kind of secret ways to grow the best orchids. So join us then. Hello, Mr. Plant Geek here. I need to introduce our contributors, Joey and Katie. Now, they will be bringing us a range of very interesting recipes to use up all of those vegetable gluts that you have, but they'll always have a little bit of a twist to the usual. So I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and if you make it, send us a picture or a sample in the post. Enjoy!
Hi, I'm Joey.
And I'm Katie.
We're very excited to be back on the plant-based podcast for a second week, sharing with you one of our favourite seasonal veg-centric recipes. If you've tried our way better Waldorf salad from last week, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch on Instagram, where we're at Joey and Katie Cook.
Today we're going to talk you through our roasted butternut and butterbean stew, which is topped with Endure oil and crispy almonds. Almonds or almonds? Can't quite remember how you pronounce it. It's a crowd-pleasing, ultra-comforting one-pot wonder, as they say, which is robust, nourishing and packed with flavour. It's perfect for a working-from-home lunch or a slow Saturday stew too. The base is vegan and the topping is vegan adaptable.
Our recipes celebrate seasonal veggies first and foremost. These guys are always the star of the show. We call it a veg-centric way of eating. But as and when our recipes do include a little meat and fish, it's high welfare and enjoyed in extreme moderation. I would say that this recipe is 98% vegan and merely seasoned with half a tablespoon of Endure per person, which is just enough to give a richer, fattier mouthfeel and lend the stew a bright, smoky pungency. But if you prefer to keep it fully vegan, a tablespoon of harissa will work perfectly too. Okay, Katie, what's in the recipe and how do people make it?
Well, it's a quickie in terms of prep. You simply need to chop onions, celery and butternut squash. If you can find a tasty organic squash, we suggest keeping the skin on. It'll add additional texture and lots of fibre. Mm-hmm. And toss these prep veggies in some olive oil and lots of sliced garlic, chilli and chopped thyme and rosemary. These herbs are fragrant and woody and we simply can't get enough of them at the moment.
So good.
So good. This delicious jumble is popped into the oven to roast for 22 minutes. The veggies will sweeten, caramelise and char and build up great depth and complexity of flavour.
Great. And so after 22 minutes, you'll need to remove the skillet from the oven and then immediately add 1/4 cup of white wine, which will sizzle right away. Follow that with a tin of drained butter beans and a cup of water. You then just need to return the skillet to the oven for a further 16 minutes, in which time everything will soften and become super unctuous and all the flavours will harmonise.
Okay, my favourite bit. Andilla is a spicy, spreadable pork sausage from Calabria in southern Italy, and a little goes a long way. Think of it like a dynamite seasoning, much like anchovies. We fry off a little in a hot frying pan in a few tablespoons of olive oil and add some toasted chopped almonds too. These become crunchy and crispy in the rich paprika-y fat of the andilla. It really is incredible. If you'd like to keep things fully veggie or vegan, then use 2 tablespoons of harissa here instead.
So delicious. Okay, so warmed bowls, generous ladlefuls of sweet, nourishing stew, and a few spoonfuls of this textural dynamite topping. It's healthy comfort food, but taken to the next level. If you like the sound of this butternut and butterbean stew, you can find the full recipe over on www.joeyandkatiecook.co.uk, as well as lots more.
And you can catch us on Instagram at Joey and Katie Cook, where we share veg-centric inspo and recipes daily. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So let's talk even more orchids. So I first came across you guys when you were running this Love Orchids initiative, which was really trying to promote orchids to customers at home, you know, people that would actually grow them. So it was great because you're a commercial establishment reaching out to the public to get that contact. And one of the ways you did that was with a stand at RHS Chelsea Flower Show. Give us just a few lines on that experience. It must have been really good for your exposure, but was it easy to do, or was it a bit panicky? I always imagine putting a Chelsea display together is probably everyone's worst nightmare, no?
Yes, it is the short answer. Yeah, it's definitely something that was very long days, lots of planning. Lots of shouting and yelling.
Someone got angry.
Yeah, it was
stressful.
Yeah, and then you kind of take the step back after it's all been done
and apologise to everyone.
I take it all back.
Yeah. And yeah, it was absolutely some of the best kind of highlights of as our thing.
There's a picture of me there.
Look.
You had a plant hunter there as well.
Yeah. So kind of going back, we had a little history bit about the going back to the kind of the Victorian kind of plant hunters, which were bringing back for royalty back then, because they were the only ones that could afford an orchid. And then roll forwards 100 or so years, and they're accessible to everyone.
We were saying basically that orchids are like pineapples. They were only for the rich and famous ones.
Kings and queens. And so, absolutely, they've come a long way. It's for a good thing. It's nice that everyone can share.
And now everyone can grow orchids. Hooray! What are the best orchids you would recommend for beginners? Like, where would we start?
I know we grow them, but Phalaenopsis are really the kind of that kind of perfect orchid to begin with, because it's so forgiving. So if you go on holiday and you forget to water it for a week, it's not just going to keel over and die. They're relatively easy to reflower. They last for months. They're not going to cost you an arm and a leg to buy. So it's really kind of, it ticks all the boxes really when it comes to orchids. And it kind of it's kind of that entry one where if you kind of if you have some success with a Phalaenopsis, which there's no reason why you shouldn't, then it kind of opens up other avenues with different types of orchids.
Look at other ones.
Yeah, and there's so many.
I went to the National Collection of Orchids at Singapore Botanic Garden.
Yeah, beautiful.
A couple of years ago, and I don't think I ever wanted to leave.
No.
Apart from the humidity, which wasn't great, but it was great for the orchids.
Yeah.
Hair went curly.
Monica. It was absolutely, completely and utterly stunning, and I loved going in. They had like a room, and then they had on display all the orchids they'd named after royalty or famous people. It's like Orchid Camilla, Orchid whatever, it just really made me laugh. But there were just so very many. I know that we don't walk into a supermarket and get a choice, of all of those. Phalaenopsis tend to be the one, but that's why, because it is the one that you're most likely to get success from.
Yeah, and it's kind of the thing to remember is, it leaves the benches here and it's within store literally that evening or the next morning.
Amazing.
So the supply chain is really important, and kind of, a plug for British plants, but that kind of supply chain is shorter than anything that can be done from anywhere else in the world. Our kind of British network is one of the best in the world. So kind of the plants are there, and then they've got to kind of get onto the fixture within the shops. So it's definitely a short supply chain.
That's cool, isn't it?
So how about the real basics with caring for that orchid then? Okay, we've got a living room. We want to grow an orchid. Where are we going to put it? How often are we going to water it? Are we going to give it any of those crazy concoctions like eggshells and banana skins? How do we care for an orchid? Just in, say, 5 easy steps. Foolproof.
I think the first one is don't overwater. Phalaenopsis are epiphytes, so they'd be up in the crowns of trees with their roots kind of holding on, which you'll see if you've ever depotted a plant, it sticks to the edge. So it would be up in a bough of a tree holding onto it, and the rainwater would come down. So there's no real kind of sitting in water. That just rots the roots out, and that's probably the biggest reason why people kind of have failure with orchids, and that's because they just leave them sat in water and it rots the roots.
I guess people worry about plants drying out, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah. If you look at the it's actually in bark. And that bark is designed to not hold water, but create kind of gaps in between, which are humid, like over in Singapore. And that's where the roots, being aerial roots, take the moisture out of those gaps. So it doesn't need to be in contact with water like some pot plants.
What about the light?
Light's really important. They love dappled light, so you've still got your net curtains behind one of those.
No one has net curtains anymore.
Exactly. No, they're really tolerant with light. I wouldn't suggest a south-facing, but any other window other than south-facing. It's a cliche with the bathrooms, but a bathroom is a really good kind of location, but so's a bright dining room or in any window that's not south.
Right in front of the window.
Yeah.
Well lit, but away from bright sunlight, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's not south facing, it can tolerate sunlight for a period of time. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you've done all of those things, it's been in dappled light, and it hasn't been overwatered, and you've lovingly cared for it, what happens after they're flowered? What do you do next? Because I noticed that you had thrown some away.
Should I not have done? I just haven't got the patience.
Yeah, I mean, when we were at Chelsea, we found out. We chatted to a lot of people, and the success people had came down to kind of 2 or 3 kind of very simple categories. So, which is why we did it and try and kind of educate people on kind of how best to look after them. The watering was one of the key ones. They couldn't get them to reflower. The simplest way to get them to reflower is to move them to a kind of cooler location.
You were saying that you put them in cold here to initiate flowering.
That's what we do. So we move them from 30 degrees down to about 20, 24. So it's only a few degrees difference. The varieties now do tend to kind of almost kind of start to reshoot before they finish flowering. So that's something we're deliberately breeding for, to make it easier for people to
give people
reflower.
that confidence as well.
Yeah.
And it's done. It's, you know, they talk about shocking plants. You know, in nature, it's kind of when the daylight shrinks. With orchids, it's temperature fluctuations. So once it's finished flowering, it's literally kind of look at the stem, and if it sometimes it goes brown, that means the stem's kind of dying off, and you just look for the little flowering nodes. So they've got little scales up the stem, and you just cut off below one of those, cut off the brown bit, carry on watering it. And within a month or two, you'll start to see a little spike emerging. It so, but I do understand people that don't want to wait or haven't got the room. You know,
Go away with your judgy looks.
no, it's people.
Ellen,
That was
not
a
Dan.
side dish of judgment there, that was. So
But can I just before we pass on, there's something else that people often cut off, which they shouldn't, which is the roots.
Yes.
Because sometimes they can look like stems, but they're aerial roots, so they need to be outside the pot, don't they?
Yeah, so it's a sign of a healthy plant. Basically, those roots, they've kind of outgrown the pot. It doesn't mean it has to be repotted, because they, you know, some of the varieties that we've got here have quite strong roots, and so they're kind of going out, essentially looking for lighter moisture. If they really offend you, you could repot it. You can cut them off, but it's not going to do the plant any good. It's kind of part of an orchid for me. It's kind of kind of gives you the gives it its kind of thing.
And that's why they're always sold in transparent pots as well, is it? So the light can get to the roots where it's needed.
The roots photosynthesize the same way as the leaves. It operates exactly the same way. Also, people sometimes say, "Oh, if it's in a clear pot, then it shouldn't be in a ceramic." It's not true. Sometimes you get more aerial roots coming out if you put it into a ceramic, but it's absolutely fine to put it in there. It's just that because we're growing on a commercial basis, we want every kind of element and every bit of kind of energy to get into that plant, which is why it's grown in a clear pot. For the consumer, for the customer at home, for the kind of the orchid enthusiast, it's no problem to put it in whatever they want.
And one final question for the people at home: what do you need to feed orchids on, if anything?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, actually. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, where they're up in the boughs of trees and in the wild, the only nutrients they'd really get is off the tree itself or off of rainwater. So actually here, the nutrient requirements that we kind of give the plants are actually really, really low. That said, a bit of orchid feed every now and again, certainly not going to do it any harm, but it's not something that's kind of critical for the plant. And sometimes if you're orchid feeding it all the time, when it's in flower, that's probably fine, but if you're trying to get it to flower, you want that kind of shock, and so kind of giving it too much nutrients is not going to shock it. It's not going to put it under stress.
So.
that is good to know. I noticed when we were walking around that some have the most lovely names. I'm all for the names. Like, I have bought plants just because of its name on numerous occasions, and actually then grown it and been like, I'm not so keen. But, do people buy orchids based on their names? Like, are the names on the packaging when they're sold? How does that work?
So kind of, because there's so many varieties within orchids, not every variety is named. So if you're looking for some named varieties, there's the RHS have kind of awarded some of our varieties with the RHS AGM label, so they're kind of in the retailers, quite accessible for named varieties. And then some of the other ones is there's some do have names, but most of them have numbers.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I saw one that was named after Margaret Thatcher.
Really? No.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure there is one. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, there's so many, and some of the names are really random, and some of them are kind of a bit more relevant.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
I imagine as a commercial company, it's more cost effective just to send a colour spectrum, isn't it? And not named. Right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's the logistics of matching up a label with the right plant when you kind of see the operation with the plants coming down the conveyor belts and those sorts of things. It's
and I wonder if people don't see the value in a named orchid, but perhaps with the fragrant ones that might start to change.
Yeah,
who knows?
so
because they'll be very premium. Won't they?
So we've tried to kind of name and kind of market the ones that kind of have that real point of difference. So kind of the AGM ones, the scented ones. Sometimes you get some with like a big lip as well, sort of thing. So
someone's just walked into the wall.
Yeah.
Just clarify
Distracted by orchids.
Usually, I think generally we see ones with just the straight stems, but also you can get hooped ones and different shaped ones, can't you? Are they popular? Are they the ones that people tend to go for? I mean, from a customer's point of view, what do we like?
Yeah, so that's, kind of talking about 10, 15, 20 years ago, those sorts of things weren't available. It's a particular variety that enables you to kind of manipulate the stems into really whatever shape you want to put it into. So we kind of go do twisted ones like a helix, and we do hoops and hearts, and I think you could probably sculpt it into a swan or something like that if you had a big enough
There's
plant.
a challenge.
Yeah, that's it. So it's it takes a lot of time to do. So as it's growing, you're kind of clipping it round to the frame. So it's something that does carry a premium. But yeah, it's definitely the kind of the way things are going. It's more interesting.
It's nice for gifts, I think. Shapes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the heart is a cliche at kind of Valentine's Day and Mother's Day and things.
Yeah.
I got some orchids at home. I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Are they still flowering?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
They only just arrived last week.
It's one if you're going to cascade them at home, you really want to do it as once a plant's is kind of flowered up. It tends to be a bit stiffer, and so kind of trying to bend it round.
Yeah, do it while it's young.
So if people at home listening are going to attempt to cascade or hoop one of theirs, it's as it grows, clip it on as it kind of goes around the hoop or whatever.
I don't know, just melt it with a candle or something to soften it. Just thinking on my feet.
Let us know how you
As always.
I'll bet my house will burn down through orchid fire. Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much for both parts of this. We love learning more about the company. It's an amazing location here. And the tips that hopefully will get a few listeners reflowering orchids and not putting them in the bin like I shamefully did.
I know. You were caught red-handed.
Well, we've got lots of other tips on the Love Orchids website. So
we can find you online, Love Orchids.
Yes, loveorchids.co.uk. Shameless plug.
You've got a really good Instagram game these days as well.
Yeah,
no problem.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for the time.
Awesome. Oh, we have a treat for you. We have Richard Chivers from Sharpen Your Spades on the podcast as the new agony uncle, here to answer all of your questions about allotments and growing your own food. So you're very welcome to call him Uncle Richard from now on. If you would like your questions answered, send us a DM or pop them in the comments on our posts on social media at the Plant Based Podcast, and we will make sure Richard answers your questions in future episodes.
Someone's asked a good question, but they've actually asked two questions about potatoes, which are really useful questions, in fact. One is about knowing when to plant different varieties of potatoes. What does it mean? And the other one's about chitting. So here's what I know. In terms of the variety of potatoes, well, essentially, potatoes can be classified into three types. You've got first earlies, your second earlies, and your main crop. And really all that means is that the length of maturity. So you could technically plant all three types of potatoes, your first early, your second early, and your main crop, in the soil at the same time, but each of them are going to mature at different rates. So your first earlies take about 10 to 12 weeks, really, really quick. They're really nice, firm salad-type potatoes that you get first off probably around June time. Your second earlies take a bit longer, maybe about 16 weeks. And then you've got your main crop, which are the ones that you probably harvest at the end of summer after about 20, 22 weeks. And they're the type of potatoes that you're going to probably want to store. So that's really all potatoes mean. Ideally, I would plant first early potatoes at the end of March, after the spring solstice. And then I'd plant second earlies in April. And I'd probably plant my main crop potatoes in April as well. The key thing about all types of potatoes is frost. Once they're in, they take very little kind of protection, need very little work other than watering in dry periods in the summer. But the frost will damage them if their foliage is above the ground when the frosts arrive. And that, for me, for example, that could be as late as mid-May. So be careful about that. The second question is about chitting. The jury's still out on chitting. I mean, everyone seems to chit. And chitting is basically when you get your seed potatoes, you prop them up in an egg box or in a tray, and you let them sprout. And the theory is that it can make them produce a bit faster. I'm not really sure if that actually makes any difference. And if you didn't chit a potato, it wouldn't make a difference. You could just still pot the potato in the ground and it would still produce a plant and it'd still go on to produce potatoes. So reality is, it doesn't really matter if you want to. Ideally, it's an easy way to store your potatoes if you have them early in the year, because potatoes get sent out between January and beginning of March time, and you don't want to plant them then, you want to store them somewhere. So chitting is quite a nice way of actually storing your potatoes in an egg box or a tray and just letting it sprout, getting some decent sprouts on them without them going to. So someone's asked the question about growing tomatoes in a hanging basket, and this actually brings back fond memories for me. Way back when I first started growing my own, I didn't have much of a garden or an allotment at the time, and I wanted to grow tomatoes, and one way I could do this was in pots, but the other way was in hanging baskets. And growing tomatoes in hanging baskets is brilliant because it's such a great way of utilising space, and having them up that high is also great for keeping the pests away and anyone wanting to pinch your tomatoes. But the way to do it is to I think really there's only one type of variety that really works well, and that's Tumbling Tom. But the good thing about Tumbling Tom is that you can get it in two colours. You can get Tumbling Tom red and you can get Tumbling Tom yellow, and basically, as its name says, it's a tumbling type of variety. And if you take a standard type of hanging basket, fill it with good peat-free compost, and basically you could probably get about 3, maybe even 4 plants in there, depending on the size of your hanging basket. And they'll grow pretty happily in that hanging basket for the entire season with just the compost. Give it a go. Plant them late March, because you're going to be planting them outside, and then pop them up in the hanging basket and hang them up in good sunshine, and make sure they're well watered, because obviously in a hanging basket, same as pots really, they have a habit of drying out. But good luck, enjoy your Tumbling Toms.
Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast News, a new feature where we delve into news in the plant world and gardening sphere. So first up, there has been a vividly coloured cobalt crust fungus found for the first time in East Sussex. It's at Great Dixter House, now of course being recorded by the Sussex Fungus Group. It's actually only been found 341 times in the UK ever. So that's exciting news. You can guarantee that there's always some fungi around. Next up, you're invited to seek out sweet chestnuts. Sweet chestnuts can live up to 700 years, but actually little is known about their habits. So the RHS are inviting you to help them out with surveying some of your sweet chestnut trees. If you'd like to find out more, from the 1st of April, go to the RHS website at rhs.org.uk/check a sweet chestnut. And lastly, for today's news round, some great news. Bee-killing pesticide will now not be used on UK sugar beet fields. It had been given an emergency use order to help protect sugar beet that was under threat, but thankfully, due to much campaigning, the government has decided it is no longer needed. Save the bees. Listen in to our next podcast for more planty type news.
Cobra is the very proud partner of Series 4 of the Plant-Based Podcast, joining in the celebration of plants, gardens and outdoor living. With over 60 models of lawnmowers available in the Cobra range, there's something for every garden. As a special offer for our listeners, Cobra is offering the chance to win exclusive prizes. Head over to cobragarden.co.uk to find out more.
So today's podcast gossip guest is Terry. He's known as the Orchid Whisperer on Instagram. He saves orchids from a fate worse than death. He's in California and it's an early start for him.
Well, I've never got up at 5:30 a.m. for the podcast, so you're already better than me.
You're already better than Michael because you know way more about orchids.
Yeah, definitely.
But Michael has got a little bit of a reputation for kind of knowing lots about orchids after writing some articles.
I don't know, almost
Michael?
accidentally. Like Gardener's World magazine in the UK just said, "Can you write about orchids?" And I just say yes to everything. So yeah, I did it. But please don't read it, Terry.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm sure it's some great info in there. I know for me personally, I know I'm still learning too. So yeah, cool. Definitely.
I love that though, because like in gardening in general, people always assume that you're an expert. You know, if you're out there or you're putting information out there in any way. But it's like, oh, you're an expert in gardening, and as soon as someone says you're an expert, there is a question that you don't know the answer for. You know, like you just constantly learn, don't you? It's one of the brilliant things about gardening, and it would be impossible to know everything about every single plant in the whole world. You know.
So you're known as the Orchid Whisperer. Does that mean that you can bring orchids back to life? Because that's probably one of the biggest queries, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like it's been a bit of a journey, but yeah, I mean, I've been fairly successful. I mean, I've got quite a few orchids right now that are in bloom that were orchids that I rescued from one facet or another, whether it was I found them at the dumpster or they were given to me by a friend actually I've been getting a lot of plants from patients recently. So I'm a physical therapist by day, and a lot of patients, you know, they're like, "Oh, you're into gardening? You like orchids? Let me give you mine because this one looks a mess." So they're asking you to save it. It's not a gift. Exactly right. They're like, take it off my hands. I can't do anything with this thing. So yeah. So actually, this little guy here, this is Kevin, and this one was given to me by a patient, and it was doing pretty bad when I got it. So now he's up and about.
Hi,
so,
Kevin. Yeah. I love that. One of the reasons why when I first saw your Instagram account was that I loved it was that you name all of your orchids, and I just love that because I think it gives you like even more a connection with the plant. You know, we name our pets, and I feel like you're like a orchid doctor. You know, like you take your dog to the vet, you're like take the orchid to Terry. So it's kind of like naming them seems completely appropriate to me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely establishes like a connection with the plant that you might not necessarily establish if you didn't kind of give it its own personality. Plus the flowers, I think, really, like I typically don't name my orchids until they flower, which, because, you know, I think the personality kind of, you know, is very much so like a part of the flower. So like one of my most recent blooms looked like a Rorschach ink blot test. Okay. So I named it Rory, you know. So yeah, so it's pretty cool.
That is very cool. Where did it all start? Where did this all start from?
Great question. So actually my wife went to an orchid show, a local orchid show with one of her friends, and bought an orchid, brought it home, and we quickly killed that orchid. But along the way, I actually found the first orchid that I rescued, Penelope. I found her at our dumpster. So, you know, if you're in the States, and Elamir, you're probably familiar. Like, orchids are really, really big this time of year. Like springtime, people give them out as gifts. They buy a bunch. But most people don't realize that, like, once they drop their flowers, they're still alive. It's still a living, breathing organism. Like, you can cultivate more flowers and for it to flower annually. So that's how I ran into my first orchid. I brought it in and I was like, hey, let's just see what happens, because we had killed the first one. And I just kind of haphazardly just kind of stumbled my way through the process, and 18 months later it flowered, and I was like, maybe I can like actually do this with more plants. And so that's kind of how I got started. And now I'm like always dumpster diving. Like every time I come home, I'm like peeking around the corner, like, did somebody leave something for me? You know? So yeah.
So you know what?
So
people do leave plants around. I have noticed that.
All the time.
I have definitely noticed that around here.
Really?
People just chuck the plant out if they think that
Is
it's
it a
no
gift,
good. Yeah,
though, or-
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you just gave some away on your doorstep last week, didn't you? That was
Yeah,
pretty
so
cool.
I just propagated. I propagated way too many plants for a little apartment, and if I was here all of the time, I would have kept them. But I'm not here all the time. My husband would not be able to look after them all, and so I just thought, oh, you know what? I'll just give them away. I put a piece of card outside our apartment door, just saying free houseplants, take them. I did not think they would go. And they all went. Oh no, there was one left, and the one left was raggedy. So I've brought it in, and I'm keeping it in the hope that my husband will fall in love with it and look after it too. But yeah, you know, there are a lot of plants around. Like, I have noticed that by bins and just like areas all around where you will find the odd plant sitting about.
But
Definitely.
Ellen, you know, I'm a nightmare for that. If a plant is dying, I just give up. I'm sorry, I do.
Yeah.
And I just buy a new one. So I'm the worst person to ask for advice of how to revive something, really.
I think I have like a new thing for us, Michael. Next time you have plants that aren't growing or you look like they're going to die, give them to me.
And then bring them to life, and then I'll have them back.
And then...
right. There you go. Exactly.
It's like going into care, isn't it? You were just saying, Terry, about how at this time of year the orchids are really big here and often given as gifts. I'm flying back to the UK tomorrow, but I'm leaving North Carolina today. I'm going to Georgia this afternoon, and tomorrow morning I'm going to the Orchid Days display at Atlanta Botanic Garden. So I'm so excited. I went this time last year. We literally only booked it last night. But I went at this very time last year, and it was stunning. And I know they've got some new displays this year, but I cannot wait. There is something about orchids that they just make you smile. Like, they're just happy plants, aren't they? You know.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm from Atlanta, so that is really, really cool that you're going to be in Atlanta.
That's cool.
So I have to like look that up and probably try to go next year. But yeah, no, orchids like definitely like within our home, they bring so much light and so much joy. And like for me, like just the amount of care that you have to put into them, I feel like the flowering or like the reward that you get from it is so much more worth it, right? Like I have an orchid right now that's been flowering since September, and hasn't dropped a flower. So I really love that you get beautiful orchids for really extended periods of time. So that's one of the big things about orchids that I love.
I get so bored of foliage plants. You know, everything's about philodendrons or monstera, and it's like there's so much more out there with flowering plants. You know, not just orchids, but even kalanchoe, calendivia. Even some chrysanthemums indoors, you know, there's so many cool flowers you can have inside, but everybody seems to want to have these metallic alocasias all the time, and it's just, I'm over it. I'm really over it. So I'm really behind orchids and their revival, really. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you.
I love big green foliage.
But
what
it gets
are you talking
boring,
about?
Ellen.
If you have like pops of colour in amongst
pops of
it,
colour
that
from
looks
the
so cool,
orchids.
like a jungle kind of thing. Like it looks like Terry has a jungle behind him anyway. So there's definitely more than orchids in your place.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a little something. Yeah, I'm all over the map. Succulents, monsteras, Chinese evergreen, spider plants. I'm all over the place.
You're basically a plant addict as well, then.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I think one of my coworkers, she asked me a couple of weeks ago. She was like, "How many plants do you have?" And I was like, "That's a great question. I don't know." So I literally went through our apartment and counted every single plant. I think I'm like between 130 and 140. So yeah, I'm in the plant addict club for sure. Yeah. Definitely.
That's why you're on the podcast.
I counted mine. It must be last year now, and it was about 130. I think that's a standard number for an addict. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that like the entry? Is that like the entry level tier?
I think we should just mention to Terry that this podcast episode was recorded at a place called Double H, which is an orchid nursery in the UK. And we basically looked around their premises, and just imagine all of the orchids you could possibly see. Just going on, for like these massive big grow houses, and just pots and pots and pots of orchids at all different stages of life. And to me, I just find that so exciting, because I don't often get to see behind the scenes at like the suppliers or growers. And it just looked absolutely stunning, all the different colours, and like pinks, and the less rare ones that they sell were the yellowy ones. I think people in the shops tend to pick up the whites and the pinks, that kind of colour. And they gave us a few tips as well about how to care for them. But where you really come into play is what to do when they've stopped flowering, because most people buy that orchid, they love it flowering, and then they go, oh, it's not flowering anymore, it looks ugly, or I'm never going to get it to flower again, or I don't have the patience to get it to flower again, and they bin it. So what do you recommend that you do when it stopped flowering? What happens next?
Yeah, so really the biggest thing is consistent watering at that point. So depending on what time of year you're in, so like right now where it's a little bit colder, the days are a little shorter, I'm probably watering my orchids maybe once every 10 days or so. And there are a bunch of different ways that you can be a bit more precise with your watering. You can, there's the weighing method where you weigh your orchid before you water it, and then weigh it again, and then you can kind of play around with the difference in that, so that if you want to be super technical about it. But generally speaking, I would say in the winter, when it gets a little colder, I'm watering every 10 to 14 days. In the summer, when it's a bit hotter, I'm watering once a week pretty consistently. And then also depending on the potting media or the potting mix that you have, that also will determine how often you need to water as well. So if you're working with a sphagnum moss more, or if your orchids are in a more of a sphagnum moss, they're going to hold moisture a little bit longer, so you may be able to go a little bit longer between those waterings. Whereas if you're in a more bark heavy potting media, then you may have to water a little bit more often. But I would say watering is the number one thing you can do to keep your orchid alive and thriving. And then from there, I think just kind of playing around with the environment that it's in. I know that I've put certain orchids in a bunch of different places all over our place. So I have orchids on our balcony, in our guest room, which I think is probably the best spot for our orchids, because it has a really nice big east-facing window. We get a lot of good like morning light, and yeah. So I think really just figuring out what is going to be the best environment for your orchid to thrive, starting with watering, and then finding a good place where you're going to get some good indirect sunlight, and then just trying to get as much humidity around the plant as possible, whether you're using rock trays and filling those with a little bit of water, or you're misting, or you're using a humidifier. So that would be kind of my advice to... and then just have some patience, like real talk, like that's the other, like that's really probably the biggest thing, because I think this year is actually, or this winter was actually the first winter where I really started to see exponential growth within my collection. So for the longest time, I'm like, man, people are calling me the Orchid Whisperer, but I haven't grown like a flowering spike from the base of the plant yet, like myself. And so I'm like, man, I'm feeling kind of like, am I really this whisperer? Like you talked about earlier, Ellen. So But yeah, I mean, it really is about patience. Like, just because you don't see flowers happening like 2 weeks after you've been watering consistently does not mean it's not thriving and not doing well. So
sure. I mean, I think two things I've just picked up from that is the environment, definitely, because I've noticed where I am here in Charlotte, the orchids need watering a lot more than in the UK. So in the UK, I would not recommend watering them more than every other week, maybe even longer throughout the winter because it's so cold. But then here they've had to be watered pretty consistently, like you said, about every 10 days all year, and that's worked here. So I've just put mine in the shower. It's had a shower, I've let all the water drain out, and then I've put it back where it belongs. And I mean, I've had a couple of orchids that have flowered, but there's one here that makes me happy every morning. Like great, big, beautiful, lovely flowers, second time. And it looks like there's going to be some more flowers, which I'm not going to see because I'm not here. But watering totally. I have to just ask a quick question. Sorry, Michael. I'm so excited about the orchid
I just put my hand up. I'm very polite.
Yeah, you are. Put your hand up when you need to speak. It's like being in class. Also, put your hand up if you need to go to the toilet.
As long as I don't have to do sports in my gym knickers, I'm all right.
No, we would not subject anyone to that. I keep seeing people saying about putting ice on their orchids.
Oh gosh, yes. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about ice on the orchids. So I will say that there is a growing contingent of people watering their orchids with ice. I think to your point earlier, Ellen Mary, I think it's very environment dependent. So if you live in a much more humid environment, like somewhere in the South, I think it could possibly work because there's just generally more moisture in the air that the plant can grab nutrients from. But I live in, Los Angeles, California. It tends to be a lot drier. Even though I live closer to the water, I have lost my fair share of orchids either watering with ice or basically top watering, right? Like misting the top, inch or so of the potting media. So for me, I'm more of the mindset like water it like it's in its natural habitat. And orchids are tropical plants by nature. They love humidity. They're typically in places where it rains quite frequently. And so they need that they need that nutrients and they need that moisture a little bit more throughout the year. So I'm not a huge proponent of watering with ice, but I've heard, every time I post about it on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, like my comments always blow up because they're like, well, my grandmother waters her stuff with ice and they do fine, and so I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think the important thing is like, do what you feel is best for the plant and experiment. I had to kind of learn, by losing a couple through trying that method, and really kind of dialing it in for me. So whatever works for you, and if it's working for you, by all means, don't let me stop you. But if you feel like it's not really getting you the results that you need, then be willing to change it up and do something a little different.
I think the ice cube thing almost got mixed up in translation. I know, especially in Europe, there was a Dutch company that was saying just add one ice cube, and they kind of meant the equivalent of an ice cube rather than the actual cold ice cube. Mm-hmm. So when I'm giving advice on orchids, I tend to say like a shot glass of water because that's a similar measurement, isn't it? And you assume that it's going to be water and not ice. But would you give your plants like slightly warm water, because also like water coming out of the tap can be quite cold first of all, so you would let it warm up a little bit, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I like to water with basically like room temp. Mm. So yeah, you're right. When it comes out of the tap, it tends to be a little bit colder. So I will water. I like to water with room temp tap water, or if I can. I'm also a rainwater collector because it rains like once a year here. So I've got like multiple 5-gallon buckets around the house, just like with rainwater, just like hanging on. So I also like to water with rainwater if you possibly can. Like that would be the most preferable method.
Something that I've been doing a lot recently is actually having my orchids in hanging containers. So say in macrame, and then I've taken a big leap of faith and I've taken away the canes and let them just dangle, and you get some really lovely effects because that is how they'd be in the wild, and I think they really appreciate it,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for sure. Yeah, I definitely have I have a few orchids that are that have bracing sticks or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I'm actually like kind of playing around with the idea of just kind of letting them kind of do their thing and kind of grow towards the sun and moving them around to like that's super dope, Michael. Oh my gosh.
I'm just wandering around my house now showing all the cool orchids, but there's one that I do need to show you, and I wonder if you've ever grown an orchid in this way before, Terry. Look at this one behind me here.
I'm not happy about that.
Oh, that is so dope.
No, I'm not happy about that.
Why not? You're so square.
Michael, that is a whole vibe right there. I love that.
This is how they grow in the wild, Ellen. This is how the orchid is happiest.
Yeah,
it really is. Look at that.
You know, like one of the things that I really want to get into is mounting my orchids.
I did that as well,
and hanging them up around the house.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You kind of have to soak. If you're going to soak them in the sink once a week, you've really got to make sure they're dried before you put them on the wall as well. I'm just not careful enough for a job like
that. Yeah. No, I understand. I feel you. I'm probably in the same boat. Yeah. Real talk.
How long have you had that orchid in there, Michael, the upside down one? How long has it been there?
Not that one very long, but do you remember I had the upside down pots in my window? And the neighbours were really shocked. They were like, those orchids are upside down. But the orchids, they were so happy, and they're happy to be upside down as well, you know. But I wanted to ask something else, Terry. Do you ever grow named varieties?
As far as like the like,
there's one here that I want to show you. I don't know if you can see it up there. It's called Red Asian or Asian Wonder. I think they changed the name.
Oh,
and the colour of that. Do you remember it, Ellen? It's such a lovely salmon red.
It's beautiful.
It's one of the most gorgeous named orchids I've ever seen. And also, when we were at Double H, there was fragrant ones as well. I don't know if you've ever tried those.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Yeah, so most of the orchids that I have are just your standard Phalaenopsis, which obviously typically don't have a fragrance, but I do have. I've had I think they're the Zygopetalum. Yeah. I have one of those, and that one has a really, really nice fragrance. And then I also have a Dendrobium, and that one is really, really floral and has a really, really great fragrance. So I'm excited to get those to flower again, so that we can actually have orchids in the house that contribute to the a little bit more to the atmosphere within the home.
I guess you can't be fussy about what you've got, because you do just pick them up from like the side of the road. So you're gonna get what you find, aren't you?
I get what I get. Yep, exactly. Like I'm trying to think, when was the last time like I actually paid money out of my pocket. I don't think I've paid for an orchid that I owned.
Yeah, but like Michael, he doesn't pay for any of his either.
Oh, that's because Michael's like the guy. Like, he is the man. Michael is the plant MVP for sure.
I'm seriously doing something wrong here.
You need to send a butler with it. Plant butler.
Michael, did I see you doing something with tea bags and orchids?
Yeah, from time to time we've done, because I tend to do like this morning TV show, and they like to have kind of store cupboard secrets and kind of things like that are very relatable. So we do this thing where we recommend tea bags for the nitrogen. I think for the nitrogen, eggshells for calcium, and banana skins for the potash. Is that something you would approve of, Terry? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use so whenever my orchids get a little weathered and just appear to be a bit dehydrated, I love using a method called the tea bag method, where I get a little distilled water, just a regular black tea. English breakfast tea is typically what I use, and I steep the tea for about 5 to 10 minutes in just lukewarm distilled water, and then I literally depot whatever the orchid that's affected, and I put it in the solution. It stays in the solution during the day, and then I take it out at night and just repeat over the course of a week or so, or however long it takes, and then typically that orchid perks back up. And to your point, Michael, it basically replicates, or the research that I've done says that it replicates kind of the tannic acid that an orchid would get from like a fresh rain, and it totally reinvigorates the orchid. I actually I did like a tutorial video on my YouTube channel, just going through the process of how to rehydrate an orchid, and yeah, now that orchid is in the process of flowering. Actually,
cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
It really does.
I think there's enough.
So it's pretty cool.
I want to show you my orchid now.
You're in a cupboard though.
Sorry,
Erin.
but I'm going to have to take you both into my bedroom. Hang on.
Yeah, let's see it.
I'm in the closet because this is where there's like the sound is better in here.
Right.
So
the closet studio.
it is like the closet studio, and also because my husband works from home and he's really loud on the phone, so you can hear him from just about every room. And he's just so loud, like that old telephone thing where he's like, hello, that is like my husband. Anyway,
Here we are.
here we go. So we're on the floor. This orchid here.
Oh, nice.
This
Yes.
is the second
I love
flowering.
coffee ones.
How awesome is that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Now, I
that
haven't
is
named
beautiful.
it. Maybe I should think about a name today. And that would be the
There you
first
go.
orchid I would name, but
Muriel.
I am so happy with that. And then this teeny tiny little one, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
cute
Muriel.
too.
That's a
But
Karen.
Yeah.
so it's what? What did you
Karen,
say?
that little one.
It looks like
It's little bossy.
I feel so sorry for anybody who's called Karen.
Right, I was just about to say, does Karen mean the same thing in the UK
Yeah.
that it does here in the
Yeah,
US?
it's exactly
Great.
the
Does
same.
it also
Alright.
mean that in the US
That-
then?
It's
no idea.
worldwide now. Worldwide.
It's great to know
Where
that that's
did
a universal
come from?
term
That's
now.
incredible, isn't it?
So basically, I'm now going to call that little orchid Karen. That poor orchid.
Karen and Muriel.
That's her name. Just that's the reminder of the pandemic. That was my pandemic
Oh, no
orchid,
way.
so she's called Karen.
Karen,
Anyway,
was she at all fussy during the process, or not really?
she hasn't been fussy, if I'm honest. So we'll have to see how it goes. I hope she doesn't live up to her reputation.
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Terry. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, this has been great. I appreciate you all thinking about me and bringing me on. And I'll be real, from the time I did the RHS podcast, that was a ton of fun, and then obviously that introduced me to y'all's pages, and I've been following your podcast as well, and so yeah, it's an honor to be a guest on this podcast. In some ways, I feel like I made it. I'm
What
not
is
even
there
gonna
to
flex.
achieve now?
I know. I have nothing left to do in life.
You just have to fix people. You have to fix
Yeah.
people and orchids. That's what you do.
And orchids.
You're like the fixer. You fix people and plants. That's amazing.
I guess
You're
so.
a fixer. Anyone listening to the podcast, check out Terry, the Orchid Whisperer, on Instagram. You have such a beautiful, colourful, instructional, educational, fun, interesting Instagram page. So, anyone listening, go and check Terry out. Thank you so much for coming on today. I love the fact, we just mentioned the pandemic, that we are actually being able to interview so many more interesting, fun plant addicts all around the world because of the pandemic. Because in all honesty, before we would have really only reached the people that we could have gone to visit, and this has shown that we don't need to do that. We can speak to people all over the world, and that's been excellent. So thank you so much.
Appreciate you both, and I really appreciate your contributions to the gardening space, and I'm always excited to see the new and exciting things that are happening with each of you. So it's been a pleasure.
Cool, thank you, and go check out Atlanta Orchid Days as well. You must go. You will really enjoy it. I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, see you soon. Have a good
Brilliant.
day.
See you soon. Thank you very
All right,
much
I'll
for
do
being
the same.
here.
See you. Thanks.
you, Terry.
Thanks again. Appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
The music for the Plant Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.